minute.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Del Disco, and I'll be the moderator host for your session today for the Louisiana Department of Ed 2020 Teacher Leader Summit Virtual Series. We're going to start in just a minute, and your speakers will take over. I just want to let everybody know that if you experience any issues with your internet connection to the meeting, just log out of the meeting room and log right back in, and that might address the issues with your internet. If you have any questions for me, you can send me a private chat, and I am under the name District Support in the chat box. Thank you. You guys have a great session.
Great. Thanks so much. And again, good morning, everyone. We're just going to go ahead and get started. I know we've got a lot to cover in a relatively short period of time. So welcome, and welcome also to folks who are watching remotely on YouTube. We're glad you're able to join us despite, all the craziness. This is great. So again, welcome to our session. This is the session entitled Build an Effective Coalition in 6 Proven Steps. So if this is not the one you wanted to be in, please stay anyway. We're happy to have you. My name is Lauren Sogor, and I'm with Advocacy and Communication Solutions. And I also have 2 colleagues of mine on today. They will be interacting with you a little bit later in the session when we do some breakout rooms. And you'll also be hearing from my colleague, Lori McClung, this morning. I also have Nikki Rice and Scarlett Bowder on with me. So you'll see their names in the queue here. So we can go ahead to the next slide and we'll get started. And while we're waiting for the slides to load, I know I put this in the chat box already, but we're definitely interested in hearing a little bit more about what you are hoping to learn this morning. So feel free to type into the chat box, any ideas you have or specific goals that you're hoping to learn. And we will be using the chat throughout to solicit your questions and just engage in a robust conversation. So please do use that. It's a really great tool. Next slide. We also encourage you, if you're not super familiar with Zoom, you may not be aware that there's a raise your hand function. So if you go down near the little black bar at the bottom with the control functions, there's 3 small dots on one of them. If you click on that, it'll give you the option to raise your hand. So that's another great way to let us know that you have a question, and then we can call on you and unmute you. And please make sure that you are muted when you're not speaking. I know it can get a little bit overwhelming with all of the background noise. So we just would ask that folks remember to do that if you're not already. Next slide. And of course, I know we're all getting very used to doing these virtual Zoom calls and meetings and things like that, but just a few assumptions and requests that we would make of you this morning. Of course, we appreciate that this is a really chaotic time. Many of you are at home with family members and children, so we understand that, and obviously if you need to take care of yourself, please do that. We understand it's difficult to be 100% present, and just ask that you be as present as you can be and avoid multitasking if possible. And just do your best, engage with us. We're really excited to hear from you all today, and even though there's a lot of people on the line, we do want you to feel comfortable speaking up and asking questions. So we want it to be a meaningful back and forth exchange. Next slide. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about us, ACS, Advocacy and Communication Solutions. So we are a national firm located, we actually have multiple offices. Our main office is in Cleveland, Ohio. We also have colleagues on the phone today from Columbus. And we are a woman and minority owned and led firm. We've been around since 2004. And our core clients are really in the nonprofit, government, and philanthropy sectors. And we've certainly done a lot of work with the state of Louisiana as well, in fact. So we're quite familiar with the education space in Louisiana. We have most recently worked closely with the Ready Start networks, the early childhood collaboratives around the state. And I'm sure a couple of our colleagues from there are on this session. So good morning, nice to see you all. You can go ahead to the next slide.
What happened to my?
I think you're going the wrong way. We want to go forward.
All right.
So ACS really does our work in 4 key areas. We obviously, as you can tell in our name, advocacy is a key area that we work in and a key strength of ours. And so we're if folks could remember to please mute yourselves, that would be great. You can go to the next slide, please. So we do a lot of state lobbying and even federal lobbying. We are trained lobbyists, so that's a big part of our work. Obviously, the C for communication is another strong suit of ours. So we're going to be actually doing a session tomorrow that for a teacher leader that many of you may be joining that focuses on messaging and message development. So that's another strength. We also do strategy development, so helping with long-term and short-term communication, advocacy, and organizational strategic planning. And lastly, our 4th area is capacity building. And so again, we do quite a lot of work to help with communication training, developing tools and resources, facilitation, spokesperson training, and other capacity building activities like that. Next slide, please. We really work in 5 areas of expertise. So obviously early childhood, as you're aware, is the theme of this particular session today, and that is one of our strong suits. I mentioned already our work with the Louisiana Ready Start networks. We also work in the K-12 education space, and my colleague Lori and Scarlett, both of whom you're going to hear from today, are well versed in this. They've worked at a school district in the past, so they're very aware of those issues. We also work on workforce development, Medicaid, and then health and human services issues around not only in Ohio, but nationally. And really we see as our difference is really the combination of our background with in-house experience. We've all worked inside organizations in roles, various types of roles in advocacy, communication, strategic planning, combined with our consulting experience. We've obviously been doing this a long time, since 2004, and then our research-driven practices. So we really focus on evidence-based and making sure that we are sharing out what works. Next slide. And last but not least is our geographic focus. You can see we've worked in and work now in a lot of different parts of the country, including Louisiana, and we're really proud of that breadth of experience that we have across the country. It really gives us a nice mix of perspectives and experiences to pull from. So we'll go ahead to our next slide and we'll dive in. So we have a short poll, icebreaker poll, that we are excited to just kind of get things going this morning. So if you can go ahead and share that. Hopefully folks can see it. We'll just give folks a couple seconds to complete that, and then Sharon can share out the results just for fun. All right, let's see those poll results, if you don't mind. All right, okay, we've got a lot of mad midlifers. That makes sense. Followed by, let's see, a tie for cheeky child and groovy grandparent, and only a couple tormented teenagers. Okay, so we'll know you'll be the ones asking the really tough questions this morning. I appreciate that. Thank you. We could go ahead to the next one. And of course, we're thinking about, as we set out to get started the session goals, and we've been hearing from you all in the chat box a little bit in the last couple minutes about what you're also interested in learning. Today, we're going to be focusing on underscoring the importance of coalition building, where a coalition might benefit you, no matter what your work role or even in your private life, and learn the basics of building a strong, long-lasting coalition. And I see in here some folks who are just really interested in learning more strategies for how to keep their coalition going, how to go forward just in the face of the pandemic, using understanding and communication to help bridge the gap. Great, yeah, so there's some great goals that we're going to be trying to meet this morning. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So we thought we would do a fun activity this morning just to kind of keep everyone engaged and paying attention and having fun with this. So we've buried little movie still photos throughout the PowerPoint this morning, and we're going to award points to the first person who can identify all the movies clips that you're going to see in the presentation. So you're going to tap your answers in the chat box. I'll warn you, there are some tricks. So watch carefully. Remember, you just want the movie pictures. At the end, the participant with the most points is going to win a copy of our new book, Influence on All Cylinders. So stay tuned for that, and definitely keep a careful eye so you don't miss any. And my dear colleague Nikki Rice, who you'll see is engaging on the chat box as well. She will be keeping track. She's our movie buff. So that's awesome. Thank you for everyone for sharing your goals. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lori, who's going to take us through the first parts of our coalition building.
Great. Thanks, Lauren, and good morning, everyone. So excited to be virtually with you. I know we had all planned to be together in the convention center, but that was not to be this year, but I'm sure it will be next year. Again, I'm Lori McClung. I'm CEO and co-founder of Advocacy and Communication Solutions, and just thrilled to be a part of the summit this year. So we want to start with definitions. One of the things that I think we all know is if I'm talking about something and you're talking about something, but we don't have a shared understanding of what those words mean, we're not going to be on the same page. And that is absolutely critical for a coalition. And so we want to start with truly, what is a coalition? So this is our definition. This is ACS's definition, the definition we share with folks across the country. People probably have different tweaks and changes, and that's fine. But this is what we mean when we talk about a coalition. So a coalition, it can be formal, it can be informal, it can be a huge group of people, it can be a very small group of people. There's no set limits or right or wrong answer on the size or the makeup of your coalition. The key is your coalition must have a purpose. You're not getting together just to get together. That's how you lose people. That's how you lose purpose. That's how you lose excitement and energy. You need to have a purpose. And that purpose can change over time. That purpose can be the one singular purpose. You get together and you disband. It can be multiple different goals that you have, but there's a purpose and people understand what that purpose is. So to have a coalition and to do it right and well, everyone knows the goal. Everyone knows where you're trying to go, and they understand the expectations related to that. That is a key component of a coalition. So a coalition can come together to stop something from happening, to start something happening, to raise the profile of an issue. Again, no right or wrong answer. You just need to have a rationale for why you're bringing folks together, virtually or otherwise, to work on something. And some coalitions have very diverse members, right? So they could have people from various sectors. They could have public-private members, or they could be all in the same sector. They could be, all philanthropy, as an example. It doesn't matter. The point is that you have a rationale for the reason you're inviting certain folks to participate in your coalition and why others are not. Making sure that you understand that there's a reason why they're at the table and that they understand the reasons they're at that table as well. So a coalition has a variety of different, I would say, shapes and sizes. They can be local, they can be regional, they could be statewide, they could be national, they could be just they could be in your neighborhood. So again, no right or wrong answer, but it is about being intentional about what you want to put in and what you're trying to get out of it. Next slide, please. So why coalition? I think we all know. Coalitions can be tough work, building them, maintaining them, keeping them effective, making them efficient. We saw in the chat some of the goals that you have is how do we actually make things more, have a more effective or efficient kind of coalition. But truly, a coalition can make things happen, big things happen, or small things, but they can make things happen when we work together, when we're truly working together in the same direction, we get further, and we get further faster. And the change that you seek often has greater staying power. You have more people who have more buy-in, who are participating, and you're sharing the burden. It's not just you trying to do something. Again, we recognize it can be a challenge, but a coalition can truly move the needle on something that you are interested in. And we know that the more people who are committed to a cause, the better chance there is of success in driving and sustaining that change. More brains are better. We say that all the time in ACS. It is always better to have 2 brains or 3 brains or 4 brains working towards something that is challenging. So by coming together to strategize and solve problems, coalition members also can learn lessons that they can apply in their own work. So the coalition benefit may be both internally, but it may be externally as well. So what lessons did I learn by being a part of a coalition? What did I see? What information did another coalition partner share that now can help my organization, my mission, my initiative independently, whether that's from a work perspective or a personal perspective? A coalition also helps to broaden and deepen your support. So if it's not just you asking for something and it's others that are participating, it actually helps to, again, it spreads the burden, but it also spreads that support. We know that early care and education is a key public interest, or at least it should be, but often those not deeply involved in early care and education understand how critical it is. And so coalition, particularly within early childhood, and I would argue particularly right now in the midst of our crisis and our pandemic, is even more important. So that is why you need to have a coalition. Next slide, please. So if you could launch our next poll. So coalitions are likely to become increasingly important to education stakeholders in the upcoming months, thinking about what might be happening as results in education budget cuts. So if you could just share with us very briefly which of the following best describes why you're starting, joining, or already in a coalition, that would be great. And we know people are at very different places there. And these are just a few reasons why people might do it. Not all of them, of course, but what's your reason for being here today? What's the closest aligned to that? Give people one more minute. Okay. Poll results. Okay, the majority of you need help educating and informing the community. That is something we're going to talk quite a bit about today, so that is great, with a follow-up of thought leadership on a problem, and then it appears seeking resources and needing buy-in. Okay, great. So really that educating and informing the community is a big piece of it. Thank you. Next slide. So you said it. Why do you need a coalition? Many of you are saying it's that helping, educating, and informing the community. There are other reasons why somebody might form a coalition as well, right? They may need to increase attention on a particular issue, or they need to share accountability for what is happening. Or as I said before, you might form a coalition in order to share the burden. The key here is understanding why you are creating it. What is the point of going from A to B? And how is this coalition going to help you do that? And again, I keep using the phrase coalition. That's what we call it. But don't get hung up on that phrase. It could be an alliance. It could be a network. It could be a collaboration. These things all actually fit under this umbrella. So this is why you would actually form a coalition. So now we're going to move into the next slide, please. 6 steps. So these are steps that, based on our 16 years of firm experience, but also our collective almost 100 years of experience in terms of our staff, the things that we have seen make the critical difference in having an effective and efficient and successful coalition. Coalitions, there are many other things that you can be doing, but if you do these 6 steps, you will be in a much better place moving forward. Coalition building, we know, requires an intentional commitment to both short and long-term strategies and investments. So you need to be explicit upfront, hence the 6 steps, and that's what will help you get off on the right foot and actually help you in terms of maintaining your momentum and making sure that you're keeping people engaged. So what are those 6 steps? Next slide, please. We're going to go through each of them in detail, perhaps emphasizing a few sections a little bit more based on the goals that you have expressed, for sure. But these are the 6 steps that we know that you need to have a strong coalition. This is about building it right from the beginning. That said, you can act, and it's assumed that you do these things in, I would say, sequential order, but many of you may be a part of a coalition already. And that's okay. You may say, you know what, we already know our purpose and goals, but we're not sure about our capacity. Well, then you can start there. Or you know what your capacity is, you know who the partners are, but they don't understand the expectations. Or we're just not sure about communication. So if you haven't started, you want to try to go in this order. But if you have started, you just jump in where it is that you need the most help. And the point of a good coalition is that you're always reevaluating. That's that tracking progress, knowing whether or not you're moving in the direction that you would like to move. And if not, how do you change that? Next slide, please. So the first thing you need to do is you need to know, where are you going? What's going to be different as a result of your work? You need to start with the end in mind. What's the destination? What are you trying to do as a result of having this coalition? So that's really step 1. And I want to just remind you, in addition to what's going on in the chat in terms of the movies, which I love seeing all the input there, it makes me happy. We also want you to make sure that you ask us questions throughout. So after each of these sections, we'll check to see if there are questions, something that you need clarified as it relates to the purpose and goals. So we want to make sure that, that we don't use a phrase or a term or something that you're not comprehending, because we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to learn and to take this information, real world information, back to your work. So please ask questions in the chat box. So purpose and goals. If you could go back actually for a second. Great, thank you. So when we talk about goals, and I think we've all heard it, but we don't always remember, at least I don't always remember all the details. We typically talk about SMART goals. So goals are obviously the outcome you want to achieve with your efforts, but to have a SMART goal, you need to be specific. So you need to know what do you need to do? What's the detail behind it? It needs to be measurable. So that goes back to how will I know when I've achieved the goal? What kind of metrics do I need to be able to say we're moving forward? And they need to be achievable. So it is great, and we totally support the idea of having a lofty goal. You might need an interim goal before you get to that lofty goal, though. You need to have something that's achievable. And that achievable part is in part because people get frustrated when you don't reach a goal, right? People feel disheartened if you don't reach a goal. You need to have interim things along the way, so making sure that something is achievable, and also that you're not bringing people together for something that maybe now is not the right time. It's not that you can't do it, it just may not be the right time, or maybe that coalition isn't the group to do it. So making sure that it's achievable, making sure that your goals are relevant. So this is really making sure that, if you want to change a public policy, make sure that you capture a goal that's actually related to public policy, not have a goal that's related to fundraising or something to that effect. So you really want to make sure that you have that opportunity to have a goal that people can say, I get it. I get what they're doing and why they're doing it. And yes, I want to be a part of it. And then you want some timing around it, right? So that's the T in the SMART. The timing is if you're, for example, planning on engaging the state legislature, you would need to make sure that the timing is right for your coalition to form, to do its work, to make sure it has its time, because the legislative calendar is their calendar, not your calendar. So your coalition needs to live within the environment that it is in. It doesn't mean you can't change that environment, but it does mean you have to make sure that you understand, is this a 5-year goal, a 10-year goal, a 1-year goal? And then making sure that those goals and the activities that you do are aligned with the actual environment that is there. Next slide, please. So the goal statements, these are examples that they may look familiar to some of you because they actually come from existing Louisiana early childhood coalitions. We just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Again, it's that definition. When we talk about goals, these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. They're SMART goals. So they're measurable. There's a timeline associated with it. They are achievable, right? So that's really, these are examples of goal statements. And when you think about it for your coalition, make sure you have this level of detail for your goal. I'm going to pause and see if there are questions related to anything we've said so far. I don't see any in the chat box, but ACS team, is there anything that we need to answer before I move into communication? Okay, not communication, into leadership, and that means I'm turning it actually over to Lauren.
Thanks, Lori. Great. Yeah, and of course, if folks have questions about goal setting at any point, feel free to type it in. We can always come back. So the second step in the 6-step model is ensuring leadership. And so again, this is really thinking about, does the structure of your coalition help it meet its goals? And that goes top to bottom. So you're thinking about some key questions as you're considering what the leadership and the governance structure is going to be. Who's making the decisions? How are you going to structure not only the decision making, but also the day-to-day operations of your work and down to the level of your meetings? So who's going to facilitate them? And again, who's going to keep the ball moving forward? And if you want to go to the next slide, there are a couple of common models that we have seen work really well, particularly within the early childhood space. So there's the model, the kind of small core leadership team where you've got 2 to 4 people, probably from a local agency, maybe a school district or a county government agency, could be a foundation or another funder. And this is a really great approach when you need quick decision making and when the people at the table are really, really aware of, kind of all on the same page and really know where the work needs to go, because it's not all that many people to make decisions. The other option for a governance structure would be a 5 to 12 person steering committee model. So we've again seen that a lot with the Ready to Start networks. This is usually the people on the committee are generally community leaders. And this is a great approach for those of you that mentioned that, trying to really engage your community and educate them. This is a great structure for that because you're really expanding sort of the voices that are speaking on behalf of your project. And it's also, it helps you secure buy-in from more people because once they're at the table and they have a really truly vested interest in it, they are more likely to go out and tell the next person about it. One thing to keep in mind with this structure, it does require really strong facilitation because you are talking about a larger group of people, many of whom may come from different backgrounds and have different kind of perspectives on the work. And then kind of the third option is really a structure that works with action teams comprising community stakeholders who know and care about your issue. This is a great way to, again, get a lot of cross-section input from different parts of the community. Again, you would still need some sort of really strong project manager and facilitator to keep the work moving. And a lot of early childhood coalitions in particular, but many coalitions use a mix of all 3 approaches. and we think about, kind of how do you decide which one of these is going to be best for your work, it's great to first think about the size of your community. So in some cases, you may be a very small community where everyone knows each other very well, and that may impact the decision about what type of governance structure you need or want. You also want to really consider how much time you have and others within the governance structure have to commit to the issue and the purpose. Obviously, some models are going to require a heavier lift on a small number of people versus being able to spread the work out over a larger group. And then you have to think about, too, what's feasible to move the work forward. So how often could people reasonably meet to keep the work going? Arguably, the more people you have, kind of the more often you have to be paying attention to what they're doing and kind of pushing them forward and facilitating those meetings so that work doesn't fall between the cracks. And that can work for some groups better than others, again, depending on your timeline as well. So those are just some of the things you can keep in mind as you're looking and exploring the different governance models. Any questions about the ensuring leadership step? I'll look over and see if I missed anything. I appreciate Bridget's comment that leadership in the movie Avengers Endgame was important to save the world. Thank you. They had a governance structure, did they not? That's funny. Great. Okay, so we'll keep moving. We're going to talk next. This is still part of step 2, but we're going to talk a little bit about ensuring capacity. This is kind of the flip side of that. And I started to mention that a little bit, but really now you're thinking, okay, in addition to sort of that timeline, it's really what is the capacity of the people within my coalition to do the necessary work? And by capacity, we mean not only sort of, I think what we call time, talent, and treasure, right? So do people have the actual time in their schedule? Do they have the skill set to do this, the talent, and do they or you have the financial resources to keep doing the work, the treasure? And if not, how would you close those gaps so that you can meet your needs? And the other thing to consider here too, and we're not going to go too deep on all of these, but it is important to think about how you assess capacity. You really do want to look at what are you trying to achieve, and who not only has those skills, but also the organizational buy-in, right? So in a lot of cases, you might have a really passionate individual, but you're looking for buy-in from their full organization. You want to make sure you have the right people around the table. And the other thing to keep in mind too with capacity, and this is something we say a lot to our clients and to our partners, the goal of having that coalition structure is that it does allow the work to be spread out so that you as an individual staff person on a school board or as a teacher or as a nonprofit leader aren't burdened with doing it all by yourself, which often is where the capacity issue comes into play. So really thinking about, even if you are leading the coalition, you do want to find ways to spread that work out. And that is also why, again, the governance structure that we just talked about is so important, because part of that is setting up those clear expectations. So there's no confusion, that people understand that they are helping carry the load so that you can all achieve your goals efficiently, effectively, and honestly without burning anyone out in the process. And the last thing I'll just mention on this piece is, thinking too about in the leadership structure kind of ties back to filling capacity, right? So you may, as you're thinking about those leaders, if you're doing a structure that might have 12 or 15 community members around the table, are there folks in your community who should be in that table because they can help fill capacity gaps? Whether those, again, be financial gaps, or let's say, for example, you have some help that you're going to need around data. Well, having an academic institution then might help you fill a capacity gap that you've become aware of. So it's just thinking creatively about capacity in a broad way. So let me stop there and see any questions about capacity before we move on. Okay, great. Next slide, please. So identifying partners, I think this is another important one for those of you that expressed, that kind of that community engagement and education is one of your challenges and one of the things you're working towards. This is where the partners become even more critical when you are struggling with kind of who to invite and how to manage them effectively to get your message out. the first step is really making that list of who in your community should be involved, either because they have shared interests, because they have influence, because they have money, right? They have funds, or because they have connections to the people that have the money and the influence, right? So you really have to think about that. You also want to think about, you want to be thinking really outside of the box in a lot of ways. You need to make sure you have a diverse set of individuals and entities at your table. So you want to think, obviously local and state government is great, nonprofits, business community is really critical, particularly for the early childhood space. We'll talk a little later about some of the way that message can be framed when we're talking about communication. Faith-based organizations, philanthropic organizations, public services like libraries or community rec centers, and the healthcare sector obviously also has a strong investment and commitment to supporting families and youth. And when you're making sort of that list of the partners that you want to engage, challenge yourself a little bit as to why. You really do want to have a clearly articulated rationale for having them at the table, whether it's, again, their influence, their commitment to the issue, their passion, their expertise in this area. That's really important. And you also want to think about who else. So you kind of make your initial list, pause and back up and kind of ask yourself who's not at the table but really should or could be. And by that, we don't just mean, individuals that might represent communities that often are left out of these conversations but really shouldn't be. So whether that's, local activist organizations or other individuals who have a vested interest. But it might also mean what we would call unlikely bedfellows, right? So people who may be interested in this space, even though they don't traditionally work in early childhood or childhood. So we're thinking, organizations like criminal justice, housing, homelessness, violence prevention. They might, again, not always show up at this particular table, but could be a really important value add and have a shared mission. And then last but not least is really thinking about who's going to make that ask. So, we often, as we're talking this through, have to stop and think, okay, we've made this great list. Okay, now who in our smaller group knows people at these organizations and feels comfortable reaching out and saying, I'm part of this new coalition or this new project, and I'm really interested in having your voice at the table. Are you able to join us? So, that's another really important part of that planning process before you actually engage them. So let me stop there and see what questions. Oh yeah, this is a great point from Bridget. She said, I noticed that in small communities, you have to know people in order to get anything done. So it can take time. Excellent point. It is time consuming. Yes, that is definitely part of this. And that is also where, again, the capacity piece comes in, because some of the upfront capacity to get the right people at the table is time intensive, and so you want to try to spread that out a little bit as well. Other questions about identifying partners, or even, if you would like to share a little anecdote about an experience you've had with that, we're happy to take a minute in the chat box and share out anything you've learned. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we're going to take a quick 2-minute break. We've realized a really important piece of our presentations, just because everyone a minute to get their water, use the bathroom. So I'm going to set a timer and we will reconvene at 9:40. All right. So we are going to regroup and keep going. It is 9:40. Okay, so moving into step 3, identifying expectations. So we already talked about this a little bit as we were talking about kind of capacity and how you build your coalition and who's going to be around the table. But again, this is really about making sure that people have a mutual understanding of their roles, commitments, and the expectations that you have of them as you move forward. So for example, we're talking about obviously things like commitment level. What are we going to be asking them to do? How often will they ask to do it? Kind of what accountability measures might be in place. For example, a written agreement to sign, things like that. And so, as you were thinking about what those expectations might be, a couple examples that we've definitely seen work, not only in Louisiana, but in other states as well, is asking that members agree to attend a minimum number of meetings, similar to like a board of directors, that they commit to serving on a subcommittee or a work group that's going to focus on a particular issue of the work. In some cases, it might be a minimum donation, or that they need to secure, a minimum amount of funding, again, depending on what your goal is. Another one that we've been discussing quite a lot recently is this idea of refraining from sending a substitute. So that may be a request that you make, and the expectations is, we really identified you, Lori, and we want Lori to come to our meetings. We don't want Lori to send Lauren, as great as I am. So, you want to think again about setting some not rules is a little firm, but some clear expectations and guidelines, so that you can have that conversation with people if things are kind of not going exactly how you were hoping. Let me see, we've got a couple questions. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Could you offer some ways of approaching others to help fund or be a part of the leadership? Oh, great question. Yeah, Lori, is there anything you want to share off the top of your head? Or do you want me to take that one?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in, and we can continue having this discussion, of course. Sometimes people will be a part of leadership if you ask them just to do it for a short period of time. So maybe you want them to be a part of the coalition for 2 years, but you want them to have a leadership role for 3 months or 6 months. You can also define leadership differently, right? So it could be that the leadership you're looking for, just because you need a little bit of buy-in, is they agree to open and close your meeting, or they agree to host the meeting. They don't have to have any other role. They just agree to provide the space. So I think it's about making sure that the leadership request is something that, of course, would be helpful, but that's not overwhelming to someone. It also could be that you do shared leadership, right? So will you be the co-chair, or will you be on a steering committee? But I, as the staff person, will support you with, all the notes and do prep for you and have a written timed agenda or whatever that looks like. So being a part of leadership isn't so overwhelming. On the other side, it could be that someone really wants to do a lot, right? So thinking about leadership, it might be having a conversation with that person to say, what role do you want to play? What do you think you can provide? They may be able to offer way more than you think. I mean, I think, and we've all seen this, we often assume that business leader A is too busy to do the leadership role that we want, or teacher B is too busy to do that work. That may not be the case. Sometimes that's our assumption, but when we ask, and in fact this happened with a project in another state, everyone thought that all of these leaders were just way too busy. And when we actually surveyed them, they said, we wish they were asking us to do more. So it is making sure that we think about those kinds of things and intentionally, and don't make assumptions, and think about different ways, again, that people can be leaders, time-wise, activity-wise, and so on. So those are a couple of examples off the top of my head. Lauren, if you have others, please jump in.
Yeah, those are great. The only other thing I would add was just the framing of the ask in terms of what would kind of tug on their heartstrings, or compel them if it's a business leader or a funder, or for example, with a business leader really making the business case for why this issue is so important, why it's going to support their bottom line. Again, that's more the communication and messaging, but it ties into kind of convincing them, or rather persuading them to have a role, is just making sure it's a really tailored and customized request backed up by data. Okay, next slide, please. So the fourth step is really understanding the environment and, getting a sense for, making sure basically that your coalition has data and information about your issue and the population that is affected most. And keeping in mind that we're not talking necessarily about a massive research project, although certainly some folks do that, but we are really thinking about, what data is out there that's publicly available. What might a partner organization already have that speaks to these issues? It could be about, which children are most affected, which families, what is the breakdown in terms of various demographic data or geographic location. So it doesn't have to be a paralyzing undertaking, but it is a really important part of the process so that you can tailor your interventions and your strategies to really meet the need in your community. The other part of this is really identifying your allies and opponents from the perspective of your coalition. So you're going to be thinking about what you can do to work with your allies and support one another's mission, and what you can do that might be necessary to counter any opposition, and just be prepared that there may be people pushing back. And so that's part of that planning. And then, of course, the outside influences. So, we're in a time right now with COVID-19 where there is an outside influence that none of us can escape, that we all have to be aware of. And this is certainly a new normal. We're all increasingly aware that we're going to be in this for a long time. So it's less about, sort of that immediate coping and more about navigating, thinking about how we're going to shift our work to navigate a new world. And you might need to be thinking about data even in a different way, kind of the pre-COVID and the post-COVID, because people's needs are going to be changing. They already have, very rapidly in terms of their employment, childcare access, availability. Honestly, the little bit of this that is an opportunity in the sense that more members of the public are maybe aware of how critical early childhood educators and caregivers are to their own livelihoods and to their children's well-being. But on the flip side is just making sure that we're cautious about the potential negative impact on quality, and people maybe not understanding or being as thoughtful about quality issues as the need to just, frankly, get their kid out of the house rises. So it is really important to think both about the opportunities and the threats that this particular crisis brings. And you would be doing that under any circumstances. This just happens to be a really salient one in this moment. So I'm going to pause there. Any other questions about understanding the environment? I'm seeing so much passion for the movies. So Nikki, good job picking really good movies. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Lori to talk a little bit about the last two steps.
Thanks, Lauren. I have to say, for those of you who are knowing what these movies are, I had no idea except for two of them. So I am impressed about the level of knowledge that folks have. Well done. I'm actually learning the answers myself because I did not know what the answers were. So now we know what we want to do, what's our goal. We know how we're going to get it done from a capacity perspective. We have a better sense of who our partners are, and they know what their expectations are. Now it's time to think about communication. This is something that we all know is important. We all say we're going to focus on, but it often gets kind of left to the end. It becomes a teeny tiny part, or it becomes very tactical. And tactics are good, but you really need to think about communication from a very strategic perspective. The way to think about it is, in order to have a successful coalition, you have to have effective communication. Without this, you do not have an effective coalition. You do not have effective strategies, and you're not going to reach your goal. We think about communication in two buckets. Of course, these are huge buckets, and we can spend hours, in fact, we do, on training just around this particular piece. But in 5 minutes, I will say it's internal versus external, and both are absolutely important. People need to know what is going on. That's going to make things a lot more effective with your coalition. But you also have to balance that with, you don't want to communicate just to communicate. People get lots of emails, they get lots of phone calls, they get lots of texts, they have lots of meetings. You want to communicate when it's appropriate. So not just to communicate because you were told to communicate, but actually because you have something to say. And you want people to do something as a result of that communication. So am I sharing the information so that because my purpose is for people to feel more empowered? Am I sharing information because I need them to do something? Why are you communicating? So we say this all the time at ACS. What's the rationale? Why do you feel the need to communicate? And the type of information that you want to communicate, the level of detail that you provide, and the frequency with which you share information will look different for different audiences. So what a volunteer needs to know and when they need to know it and how much they need to know will look different than perhaps what your spokesperson needs to know and when they need to know it, and whatever the details are that go behind that. Your internal leadership might need to have a very different kind of set of information, and the messenger for that information might look different, whether it is a different person and or a different vehicle. So you have to think about, what do you want to say? Why do you want to say it? Who's the best person to say it? What's the best method to actually get that information out there, and when? So those are key components of that internal and external communication. I will say we are big chart fans. I think it's a lot easier to, list out all my audiences in, one column, and what are all the messages I need to share and across the other axis, the X axis and the Y axis, and fill in the blank. Particularly when you have a huge coalition, it's really important, even actually a small one, it's important to know that Lori needs to know this on this day in this way versus what Laura needs to know on this day in this way. It doesn't mean that you're telling people, you are maybe telling people different things, but it's more because of what their role is and what you need from them. And then there are going to be some things that you share with everybody, right? So you have to really be intentional. I think that's the key message, being intentional about your communication needs, desires, approach, and then who is going to actually do the work. Communication is not something that just happens. So thinking about who has that responsibility as a lead, and who internally and externally, again, needs to know what's going on. Next slide, please. On that internal communication, there are many different common internal strategies. These are just a few of them. For you, it's about deciding what's best for your purpose. What format is going to provide you and provide, more importantly, the audience what they need, when they need it, how they need it. We say this, again, all the time at ACS, we're not the target audience, right? What I want or what works for me is not what's most important. It's what our coalition members want or need. So sometimes you just need to ask them, what's their preference? Would you rather get a phone call? Would you rather get a weekly email or a daily email? Do you want to be part of a listserv where people can go back and forth? Do you want that frequent in-person meeting, or maybe not now, your Zoom meeting? But whatever that is, each of those decisions require a fair amount of work to make them happen effectively. So let's say you decide to do a newsletter. When is it going to go out? What's the method? Do you have the right database if it's going to be email? Do you have the right database if it's going through hard copy mail? Who's going to develop the content? Who's going to review the content? Is there a design? Is there a layout? And who's going to provide that? There could be an in-kind support. It could be something that you pay for. So there's all sorts of decisions behind each of these things. And you need to know what works best, again, for what you want people to do as a result of that communication, and what is it that they need? How do they need to receive it? Communication does not just happen. You have to be very intentional about it. Next slide, please. And then there's the external communication. Again, we do full-scale, multi-day trainings on all of this, but these are just the key questions that you're going to want to think about when you think about your external communication. Who needs to know about your work? What do they need to know? What messaging worked before, or what messaging is working now, or what messaging isn't working? So thinking about what do you want to say? Who should deliver that message, right? Again, who's the best messenger to that audience, that person? Who are they going to hear it better from? Their pastor, a teacher, their neighbor? Who's delivering that message? What's the best way? Again, that delivery method, which could be email or social media or a meeting or a listserv or whatever that looks like. And what do those messengers really need to do the work well? So what support are you going to provide that messenger, which could be you, it could be someone else, in order to actually communicate with others? And I do want to put a plug in that tomorrow morning, we actually have an entire deep dive session specifically on messaging as a part of the Teacher Leader Summit. So that is at the exact same time as it was today, so 9 o'clock Central tomorrow morning. We'll do a deep dive on messaging. So if this is something where you want to go deeper, that would be a great time to be able to do that. Next slide, please. And then we're going to talk about tracking progress. So now I've communicated. I have my coalition, it's going. How do I know that I'm being successful in any way, shape, or form? What will success look like for this effort? What are the benchmarks? How are you going to track your progress? Literally, what are the metrics that you're going to use? Are you going to put it in an Excel spreadsheet? Are you going to share it with other people? Are you going to check it every week, every month, every quarter? How are you going to be able to measure that you're actually moving forward? And how are you going to use that information to perhaps retool what you're doing? If it turns out you're not moving in the direction you want, you're not moving as fast as you would like, or you're moving too fast, this can actually help you pause and recalibrate as necessary. Pause, decide, do I need actually different people to actually join our coalition? Do I need something different to be accomplished or to be launched in order to accomplish our goal? And again, how are you going to share that information? Is that just to make your own internal decisions? So it's really just for your steering committee or your full coalition, or is it something you want to share with the world? That's a very critical thing you need to think about. So how will you assess what you're doing? How will you assess what gets shared, and to whom does it get shared? So as you determine how to define and measure your success, think about your milestones. Think about the benchmarks. There's all sorts of tools out there, including on our website and a million other ones out there, to help you think through what could your benchmarks really look like? What could your metrics really look like? How do I collect that information? And I don't want to suggest that this is something that is excessively time consuming. It can take a little bit of time, but what's most important is that you at least take a moment to pause and reflect on whether or not what you were trying to accomplish, that goal from step one, are we getting closer to reaching that goal or not? Is this coalition, the way it's formed, going to actually make that happen? And you want to be able to adjust your strategy before it's too late. I will pause and see if there are any questions. I don't see any in the chat box. So I will turn it back over to you, Lauren.
Great. Thank you, Lori. And we did share on your screen, you can see our website where you can find tools and resources on all of the topics we were just speaking about, advocacyandcommunication.org/tools-resources. And I know you'll have access to this as well, so folks will be able to find this after the session. So we're going to spend the rest of the session this morning doing an interactive exercise. We're going to use the breakout room function within Zoom to break everyone up into separate rooms. And we're going to discuss some strategies around what you would need to do in a coalition that was charged with protecting funding for early education, because we know this is probably going to be happening to many of you, or it already is, where budgets are being cut in light of the pandemic. And folks are going to have to come together to make sure that this critical work that supports young families and young children continues. So we're going to go ahead and have our trustee friends at Team Dynamics break us out into our rooms, and we will be in the rooms for 15 minutes. So go ahead, Sharon, and we'll just hold tight.
going back to the main session.
All right. Just a minute. I know we're all just regrouping. I'm going to go ahead and share out what we all worked on in our sessions. Just a minute. While we wait for, I want to just make sure everyone's back in. Okay, so let's go ahead and just spend a few minutes talking about what you all discussed in your breakout session. So we've got about 15 minutes left in our session, and we'll spend about 10 of them on this. So who was the kind of reporter for breakout room 1?
Lauren, I will do the report out for group 1.
Great,
so
thanks,
we had 3 strategies that folks came up with, which was one is to make sure that we have the research on who, and I apologize, I was trying to make it bigger. I can't actually read it.
Sorry, I can do that. Just a second.
Great, thank you. So one is to have research on who gets pre-K and who doesn't, so that folks will actually understand the impact of receiving high quality early childhood. The second strategy is to work with our support advocacy groups who can be voices. So there are a variety, like the Louisiana Policy Institute, as well as the Child Care Association of Louisiana. So work with and support advocacy groups and recruit them to be a part of this work. And the third is to think about policymakers or other community leaders. So we talked about both, whether it could be current policymakers or former policymakers, engaging them so that they understand the importance of children receiving high quality care while their parents are at work. On the partner side, again, this is all aligned, the idea that we would have those professional organizations that would be a part of this work, universities who can help with the research, and they're also the ones where many teachers are getting trained, policymakers, whether they're existing ones that can bring or make a change that is necessary, or former ones at all levels of government, DCFS, because they actually see the impact of a child who receives high quality early childhood versus those who don't, as well as those lead agencies who actually receive funding. They actually both have resources, but also a responsibility to help bring all these things together. So those are the 5 types of partners. Thanks.
Great. All right. So this was my breakout room, number 2. And Bridget, if you're able to unmute, do you want to share what we came up with?
All right, so we have to ensure as many high quality programs as possible. We also have educating the public about the importance of the quality of the program and the advocacy. And
Great.
5 coalitions that we would partner with are like parents for the students, because you want the parents' involvement, especially since it's their children's education that they're worried about. The mayor of parishes, whichever one it may be you're in, have them involved as much as possible to see about the programs that their nieces, nephews, or other family members are in. Volunteers of America, great association with helping all early childhood education. Library systems that can provide the training and funding, especially for those that need it. The school boards, which are usually in charge of most of the education around the schools and the parishes, that are usually going to help you try and find those classes. And the banks, because they have all the money that we need to help with these programs.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Bridget.
I did it.
That's great. Thank you. Breakout room 3.
That's me. So I know we had some active people chatting, but I am going to do the report out. As far as types of partners, right off the bat, parents of students, especially those with special needs and those youngest children, because that's what the issue is certainly all about. Two is our businesses, and usually what we see around the country is that sometimes people are hesitant to engage business, but I think it was Cynthia, I think it was Cynthia that talked about the fact that the local community spends their money there, so they should be a part of this and they should have skin in the game. Those are my words, but I'm channeling her and her rationale there, which was beautiful. And then the third, which is a combination of a couple of things that were communicated, those within the maternity health space, hospitals, pediatricians. Obviously, I think everyone on this webinar knows that they all directly engage and have an impact and are impacted by an effort to protect funding for this issue. And then as far as strategies, it was interesting. The first thing that came up was monitoring progress and proving that what you're doing is meeting the commitment that we're all making with this effort. So the accountability side, really important. And then raising awareness among the public and among key audiences. And then advocacy came across in a couple of different ways. We know that there's sometimes a hesitancy, especially in the public space, regarding your ability to advocate. But what I talked about was the broad umbrella of advocacy. So you can do a ton of things, and you can use someone on the committee like local business to help advocate and engage public officials if there's hesitancy among others to do that directly. But advocacy can be done in multiple forms, like engaging a local business or engaging a pediatrician's office to say, hey, be a part of this, and this is why it's important. So there are many ways to advocate and advance the effort. And that is as far as we got across both, but good conversation. Thanks, Lauren.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, breakout room 4.
Hi, it's Nikki. This was our group, and we had a lot of great ideas. I'll just highlight the ones that are maybe a little different from what other folks said, which we had grandparents as its own category under the type of partners because they have a little bit different perspective than just parents. We also definitely talked about faith-based organizations and child advocates, so children's services or those who might be checking in on the welfare of kids should also understand the importance. And under our strategies, we really wanted to educate the whole community on why it's important. So back to that piece of the coalition building on communication, this was sort of a focus of ours. We made it a strategy. And then specifically creating champion advocates from our local officials. If school board members already are the ones who are sort of overseeing the work, it makes sense to make sure they are your best advocates out in the community and potentially at the state and federal levels as well. That's it from group 4. Thanks.
Thank you. This is great. I really struck by, the similarities across the groups and the fact that each one seems like they came up with at least one different type of partner or audience for their coalition, and then some of the same. And also just seeing that, a couple of the key themes here were the kind of communication piece, the public education, really emphasizing that value proposition for members of the community, why this matters. And then matched with kind of this idea of advocacy and both policy advocacy and more broadly using that term to really help people understand what they can do to protect this really important and vital community resource. So I really like seeing those themes, and this was really fun. So I hope everyone enjoyed doing the breakouts and seeing Jamboard. This is obviously a really neat tool, and we'll go ahead and go back to our slides. And Sharon, I'm happy to continue sharing, or if you'd like to take the reins back, just let me know.
You can continue to share.
Okay, great. So let me go ahead and grab my PowerPoint back. Oops. 1 minute. Let me get all the way to the correct slide. And that was great. Okay, so that was awesome. Thank you again, everyone, for sharing out. I want to just take a moment and pause to see if there are any questions about anything that we talked about in the breakouts or anything related to, you know, sort of strategy and partner identification. And obviously there is another movie photo on here. Just pause for a second. Questions? Okay, so here's our last clue and the photo of the book, which is the prize. So I'm gonna just pause there. Please do take some time to think of any questions you might have for us. We'll just pause for a moment for you to either unmute yourself or type those into the box. And in the meantime, I know Nikki's hard at work calculating the winner of our movie contest. So I'll give her a second. And Lori, feel free if there's anything you wanted to add while we're waiting, feel free.
Thanks, Lauren. Actually, I just wanted to say thank you all for your active participation. Hopefully this gives you at least the beginning of ideas about how to be more effective in your coalitions, how to improve the coalitions that you're a part of or to get one started. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you, relatively speaking, tomorrow on our messaging session for the Teacher Leader Summit. And hopefully you have a good rest of your day. It's a long day to be sitting in front of these. So hopefully these are, each one of your sessions moving forward are very engaging, we hope. Thanks, Lauren. Nikki.
Yeah.
Drum roll.
Yeah, right. So first, thank you to everybody who made a valiant effort. It was great to see so many movie buffs. We actually have pretty close to a tie. So Bridget and Candace both had the most number of movies they were the first ones correct on. So that's how we measured it, was the first one to respond. They were pretty much a tie, so you'll both be receiving a copy of the book. And also, just as a heads up, you all missed one movie very early in between Superstar and Inception. On the poll page, there was a still from the movie Dave, which is one of my favorites. Made me a little sad that no one got it, but you got some other hard ones like Short Circuit too. So well done, everyone. We'll make sure to get copies of your books to you. And thanks again. That was it. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. That's awesome. I just want to make sure I say, so Bridget and Candace, please go ahead and just private message us your email addresses so we can connect with you and make sure you get your books. And I want to remind everyone to please complete the evaluation through the Schedge app. We want to make sure we get your feedback on this. And we are happy, again, to just hold for a minute if there's any other questions. And otherwise, thank you again, everyone, for your time today.